More conversation, more Adrienne Lawrence. And this time, I'm bringing you the COO, also the Chief Advocacy Officer of Reform Alliance. That is Jessica Jackson. Thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so I know right now with the midterms approaching, being less than a week away, that I think 72% of likely voters say that crime is an extremely or very important issue. It definitely seems like people are very concerned right now with crime. How is it impacting how they vote going into this midterm election?
Absolutely. I think coming out of the pandemic, where we were all in our houses, we weren't outside a lot. We're now coming back outside over the course of the last year. We've seen crime much higher than it was during the pandemic, and in some areas a little bit higher than it was before the pandemic. So people have that on their mind, and as they're coming into the elections, it is an important issue that people are voting on.
Yes, and if we want to increase the sense of public safety, because even if it is a matter of something that is operating in people's subconscious or even in their conscious, what are we going to need to do?
Well, I think that the current crime that we're seeing is really an indictment of the system that we've got. It shows us that there are still some very large systemic issues that we haven't dealt with and that we need to really start addressing. So I'm hoping that when voters get to the ballot box, that they're looking for people who aren't just pledging the same tough on crime laws that we've been trying for the last 5 decades and seen terrible results from, but that they're pledging innovative new programs that are going to address some of the underlying reasons why people are actually committing crime, instead of just locking people up and traumatizing them and making it harder for them to succeed when they come home.
And the thing is that I'm seeing a lot of individuals who are working on the front lines in terms of advocacy and doing work. They're noticing that a lot of this perceived spike in crime isn't a reflection of what's actually going on the ground. And that it's essentially being hyped up oftentimes by those on the right, because it means that there's more justification to continue to fuel money into our criminal justice system as well as our policing system. So what do we do in terms of addressing people's psyche when they're really being fear-mongered into voting for a particular group that is not necessarily going to spend money or use resources that would actually better our society?
Yeah, you touch on a very important point. The prison industry, and yes, it's an industry, it's billions and billions of dollars a year being poured into incarcerating people with really, really bad results. So on a national level, we see recidivism, meaning people coming home and ending up back in prisons and jails, at about 68%. Now, that doesn't mean that 68% of them are committing new crimes. In fact, a lot of them are ending up going back into the system because they were placed on probation or parole and had horrific conditions placed on them that you or I probably couldn't even meet. So they're ending up back in the system on a supervision violation about 40% of the time. We need to start there. We need to stop this revolving door of people coming out and ending up right back in. And we need to find the leaders, the elected leaders, who are really going to take this problem on, who are going to make sure that people have housing, make sure that people have access to mental health services, make sure that people have access to substance abuse treatment if they need it, make sure that they're able to actually get jobs when they come home, or find jobs in the first place. Make sure that they're actually doing things that are going to prevent crime as opposed to just reacting and locking people up. And I think the media is absolutely hyping this up. It's clickbait for people. Anytime there is a crime, media is there right away to address it and to get it out there. You turn on Fox News any night of the week, you see Tucker Carlson jumping up and down about crime happening in inner cities and how we have to elect Republicans to stop it. It's just not true. And what we're really seeing is that the same systemic issues that were there before the pandemic are still there and still need to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. If not, I would even argue that they've worsened in part because of the pandemic and really showing just the lack of conscious care of people in terms of these facilities and ensuring that they are safe and protected as well. So it's as you noted, it's a business and is very much a problem and a reflection of the brokenness of our system. And I know that at Reform Alliance, you all do work on being bipartisan experts, bringing people together, reaching across the aisle and seeing what needs to be done. And what would you argue needs to be done here when it comes to politicians, particularly because we're seeing such a partisan push when it comes to creating this fear mongering for people to assume that crime is spiked and it's going up in their area and whatnot. So when it's the right, really leveraging this to justify continuing again to funnel money into policing as well as the criminal justice system, what do you do with that in terms of these politicians?
Well, Adrienne, I just want to take a step back and say, it's really both Republicans and Democrats that got us into this situation, unfortunately, and that have continued to run on these tough on crime politics. You look down in Oklahoma, very important race going on down there, the governor's race. Governor Stitt, who is running for office down there for re-election, he actually did the largest number of clemencies in any one given day. And the Democrat who's running against him is using that against him in her campaign, is trying to smear him for the criminal justice reforms that he has done. So we see, the Willie Horton effect on both sides of the aisle, and it's really taken both parties to get us into this mess. That's why at Reform Alliance, we believe strongly in pulling together both sides of the aisle. And the way we do it is we build the most unlikely coalitions you've ever seen of faith leaders, business leaders, local elected politicians, people who've been directly impacted. And we go to our electeds and demand real change and demand that folks on both sides of the aisle actually address the problems. So I think the main way that we can solve this at this point is by showing that this really shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is a people issue.
Absolutely, and I would argue that meeting the people's needs would be what lawmakers are supposed to do. But I know that kind of sounds ridiculous to a lot of people out there, particularly our lawmakers, but I'll leave that at that. In terms of other things that you are focused on right now, again, given that the midterms are literally right around the corner, what is Reform Alliance really putting at the forefront in these last few days?
Well, Reform Alliance has had an incredible 3 years. We started in the wake of Meek Mill's incarceration, who was our co-chair. He was incarcerated for a sentence of 2 to 4 years, not because he had committed crime, but because he was on probation and he broke one of the conditions on the probation and popped a wheelie in a music video and actually broke up a fight that was happening at the airport. And his judge decided that that was enough to send him back to prison for. So once he got out and actually had his underlying conviction overturned, he started the Reform Alliance along with a very unlikely group of people, including Michael Rubin and Sean Carter and many others that are just an incredible force. And because of them, we've been able to pass 16 bills in 10 different states over the course of the last 3.5 years. We're still continuing with our state work. That's where the majority of the 4.5 million people who are on probation or parole are. But we're also now starting to work on the federal level. You might think that's absolutely crazy, given that Congress is so divided right now, and these political times are just so divided. But we've actually been able to build a pretty good coalition and get lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to agree that something needs to be done about federal supervision. We can't continue down the path of spending all of our resources on incarcerating people when they're not even committing crimes. And we need to actually give them a real meaningful chance to succeed. So I'm really excited to continue our state work and continue to be pushing for the federal bill, and then also to be continuing to working directly in communities. We've started doing job fairs. We did one in Madison Square Garden, one in Philadelphia. We're gonna continue to work on those all across the country, helping people who have been systems impacted get jobs and move on with their lives.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you are helping a lot of individuals who have been roped into our carceral system to be able to find opportunity. And those, I know you had authored, I guess, at least 16 bills that you were able to get passed. What were they focused on? Was there any particular issue for each one of them, or were they uniformly, you are pushing for a very similar kind of change, just at different levels or different locations within state governments?
All of it deals with supervision, and all of it is designed to not just help people who are on supervision and treat them with more dignity and help create a pathway for them to earn their way off sooner, but they all also increase public safety. So we're using evidence-based practices that we know are going to free up resources that can be used on preventing crimes, and that are actually going to make us safer in the long run.
That's great. Can you give us some examples of this evidence-based approach that you're taking?
Absolutely. I'm super proud to say that this year we were actually able to pass a bill down in Florida that creates incentives for people who are on probation to get off of probation, either by bettering themselves through getting an education or by continuing to hold down a job and getting work credits. We were actually able to get Governor DeSantis to sign that bill into law. We've also been able to get some of our legislation passed out in California, which put a cap on supervision out there. So you can't be sentenced to more than 2 years for felony supervision, 1 year for misdemeanor probation. And that way, we're not expending resources to just keep people in a system that's really just trapping them for 10, 15, 20 years. We're able to save those resources, invest in their well-being and success.
Fantastic. And so for anybody out there who wants to get involved with Reform Alliance, where should they go?
Yep, you can follow us on social. Reform Alliance is on Instagram or on Twitter. You can go to our website, reformalliance.com.
Fantastic. That is Jessica Jackson, COO and Chief Advocacy Officer of Reform Alliance. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.